she was on the Today Show with Jenna Bush Hager, and she presented her Science of Love on TV. She is an associate professor at the Department of Psychological Sciences at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Sandra is the director of the Neurocognition of Emotion and Motivation Lab, which studies the interaction between emotion and cognition in general, and the interaction between romantic love and cognition specifically. She received her PhD in biological and cognitive psychology from the Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So please help me welcome Dr. Sandra Langeslag.
So thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to present about my work. So I'm happy to share my work with you. I'm also happy to take questions throughout the presentation. So if something doesn't make any sense or you have a question, then feel free to just speak up. So I'm going to talk today about the regulation of romantic love, which is one of my research lines. But before that, I want to talk about what is romantic love, because that's often one of the first things people ask me when they hear I do research on love. And the thing is, we don't know. Scientists cannot agree on a definition of love. We do agree on that there are different forms of love, but then we don't agree on how many different forms or which ones. So that's a little messy. I use a model that has been proposed by Helen Fisher that was really appealing to me when I read it. And she says that throughout evolution, 3 different love systems have evolved in humans. So the first of those is sexual desire. It's also sometimes called lust, so that's one of the systems. The other one is infatuation. It has also been called passionate love or attraction. And this is sort of the early stages of love, when you have butterflies in the stomach and you're euphoric but also very nervous. And then the third system is attachment, and this has also been called companionate love. And this is a much calmer form of love when it develops slowly over time, but then you just like hanging out with your beloved, and it's actually very calming. And then we can also be attached to people other than romantic partners. So we also typically are attached to our parents, our children, our friends, pets, things like that. So attachment is not necessarily romantic. I like to talk about the symptoms of romantic love. Now, romantic love is not considered a disorder, but people that are, especially in the infatuation stage, they can be a little crazy, and they show some symptoms that overlap with other mental disorders. So there are physical symptoms, especially in those early stages, like your heart is racing, you're blushing, sweating, just a lot of physical arousal. And then there are behavioral symptoms, so people tend to stare when they are in love. They tend to dress in a way that they think the other person will appreciate. And they tend to go places where they think they may run into their beloved, things like that. Then there are affective symptoms, so these are the emotional feelings. So like I said, euphoria, for example, but also stress and being nervous. And then finally, there are cognitive symptoms, and those are the ones that I usually focus on in my research. So cognition is basically thinking. So examples of cognitive symptoms are that people that are in love have a lot of attention for things that have to do with their beloved. So for their beloved, but also anything that has to do with their beloved. They also have better memory for that information that has to do with their beloved. And on the flip side of that, they tend to be distracted from other things. So people that are really in love think about their beloveds all the time, but then don't focus so much on their homework or their work, maybe. So I study the interaction between love and cognition. So I have shown, like I said in my research, that love improves attention and memory for information that has to do with the beloved, and it decreases attention for other things. But today we're going to talk about how cognition affects love. So can you change how in love you are by thinking certain things? That's also something that I've been studying. But again, before I want to talk about the results of those studies, I want to talk about why study romantic love. Because people often say, oh, that's so cool that you study romantic love, how interesting. But then when I try to get money from grant funding agencies to do the work, they say, well, why should we spend money on this, right? Because love is all nice and good. We don't need to research that, and I do not agree. So the lifetime prevalence of romantic love is about, well, not exactly, but close to 100%, which means that almost everybody experiences romantic love at some point in their life. Many people experience it many more times in a lifetime. And if you think about mental disorders, so all mental disorders together, depression, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, everything together, the lifetime prevalence is about 46%. So almost half the people get a mental disorder at some point in their life, which is a lot, right? But that's still a lot less than romantic love. So romantic love applies to virtually everyone, and therefore I think it's important that we study it so that we can understand what's going on. In addition to studying those mental disorders, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't study those, but those are important, but so is studying romantic love. Now, a lot of people know that love has a lot of positive effects on individuals and on society. Many of us have experienced those ourselves. When you are infatuated, that often is accompanied by lots of positive emotions like euphoria, like I already mentioned. We know that romantic relationships are good for happiness and life satisfaction. Typically, people that are in a relationship are happier than people that are not in a relationship. But I think a lot of people forget that there are also a lot of negative effects. And I think we actually personally experience them, but then we forget about them. So we also know that infatuation is accompanied by a lot of negative emotions. And like I said, it's nerve-wracking to be infatuated, right? So it comes with a lot of stress, nervousness, and jealousy, for example. Romantic breakups are accompanied by very negative emotions: sadness, anger, shame, guilt, and are also a risk factor for depression, especially in adolescence. Even though people in a relationship are usually happier than people that are single, this is only the case if it's a functional relationship. There are also dysfunctional relationships, and those are really not good for you. They decrease your happiness and life satisfaction. And so in that case, you're better off single than being in a bad relationship. Love plays a role in several mental disorders. There are sexual dysfunctions, paraphilic disorders, erotomanic and jealous delusional disorder, and people have killed themselves over love. And then on the flip side, love plays a role in criminal behavior. So there's stalking, there's domestic violence, and then people have murdered other people because of love. And so if we look at all these positive and negative effects, I hope it becomes clear that it's important that we study romantic love so that we can increase the positive effects and decrease the negative effects and make everyone's lives a little better. Okay, so the problem that I'm going to talk about in this presentation today is that in long-term relationships, love is sometimes weaker than desired. So people that are in a long-term relationship, we know that it decreases over time, so we know that infatuation and sexual desire are usually very intense early on in a relationship, but then they decrease over time. Attachment, so companion love, actually takes some time to develop, so it's low in the beginning, but then it increases over time. But then there's research that has also shown that it then slowly decreases again over the course of decades. And this, of course, threatens romantic relationships. One of the main reasons for divorce is that people say, we're not fighting, no one cheated on one another, but the passion is gone, for like brother and sister. And so then people could decide to get a divorce just because love feelings have decreased over time. On the other side, in unreciprocated or forbidden love, love feelings may be stronger than desired. So sometimes people are in love with someone that they don't want to be in love with, like an ex, for example. So we know that romantic breakups, like I said, decrease happiness and life satisfaction are a main risk factor for depression. And so I was thinking, what could we maybe decrease people's love feelings for an ex-partner or someone maybe you're not supposed to be in love with, like a boss or a student or something like that. So I thought a potential solution may be, how convenient would it be if we could change how in love we are, right? So if we could make ourselves a little more in love, if we are in a long-term relationship and we feel like those love feelings are dwindling, or maybe make ourselves a little less in love if, for example, after a romantic breakup. So that's called upregulation, that is like increasing your love feeling, and downregulation is making it less intense. And so in one of my papers, I coined the term love regulation, which I then defined as the use of behavioral or cognitive strategies to change the intensity of current feelings of romantic love. So behavioral strategies are things you can do, and cognitive strategies are things you can think. So far, so good? So, I don't know if you're thinking about this, but people have tried to develop a love pill forever, right? Love potions, eating oysters, eating chocolates. We've tried to do this since forever. And lately there has been a kind of, well, some work, not a whole lot, but some work on trying to understand the biological basis of romantic love. So what is happening in people's brains, what is happening in people's bodies when they fall in or out of love. And now researchers are suggesting that we can use that knowledge to then basically design a love pill, like a pharmacological love regulation method. Now that would of course be very interesting, but I don't think we're there yet at all, and I wonder if we're ever going to get there, if we're ever going to be able to create a love pill for several reasons. We're just starting to understand the neurotransmitters and hormones that are involved. So we know it's probably something to do with dopamine and serotonin and testosterone and estrogen, but we don't really know a whole lot yet. But okay, that can be solved, right? We could do more studies and understand it better. But then there's another issue that even if you know that, say, dopamine levels go up when someone is in love, that is different from knowing that if you make someone's dopamine levels go up by giving them some pill or something, that they will then feel more in love, right? So does changing the levels of those neurotransmitters or hormones also change how in love you are, right? So that would be the next step to determine that, which is, again, a lot of work. But then I was wondering, okay, imagine we have a love pill and you go to the doctor and you say, no, I feel like I'm falling out of love with my spouse slowly but surely. Can I get a love pill? Sure, says the doctor, here you go. How does the pill know who to increase the love feelings for, right? Now you take a pill, are you not going to fall in love with someone else than your spouse? Like, that'd be problematic, right? So how can we make sure that that pill targets the love feelings for the right person? As we know, all drugs have side effects, and some of them could be bad. So a love pill will also have side effects, and some of those may be really bad. So is this a good idea for people to take? And then there are ethical issues, and I'm not even talking about spiking people's drinks when they don't know, right? Because that's very bad, but also very illegal. But even if you go to the doctor and you say, my partner treats me horribly, I'm falling out of love with them, can I get a pill to be more in love with them? Is that a good idea, right? If they are treating you horribly, should you maybe not be with that person anymore? So how is the doctor going to decide if it's a good idea to give you a pill to increase your love feelings or to decrease your love feelings? Like that's a tough decision. And so I think all of these problems, and there are maybe even more, are going to make it very difficult, if not impossible, to ever develop a love pill or a love potion. So that is why I focus on behavioral and cognitive strategies, things that people can do and things that people can think, because we can implement them way sooner. We can just test if it works in the lab, and people can then do it. And they have fewer physical and ethical risks. We cannot force anyone to do something or to think something, so it's really within someone's own control to use these strategies or not. So far, so good. So then I started to do research on, can people regulate love feelings? But first I wanted to know what people think. So what beliefs or preconceptions people have. So do people think they can regulate how in love they are? Do they think they can change that? I did a study, and there were some people that said love is a natural process that should not be controlled. And I've even heard this from fellow scientists that would comment on my papers. They would say love is kind of magic and good, and we should not mess with it. I don't agree. We know that people can regulate their emotions and that that's a really good thing to do if you do it in the right way. And so I think it can also be very helpful for people to change how in love they are. And so about 5 to 15% of my participants say, I do not try to prevent love feelings from declining in long-term relationships, because if that happens, then it happens, and we just need to break up and move on. And then, I already said, emotion regulation can be adaptive, so I don't think that's people are welcome to think that, but I don't think it's accurate. Then, also, people seem to think that love regulation is difficult or even impossible. So 5 to 10% of my participants, whenever I ask them, what do you do to decrease love feelings after a romantic breakup, instead of giving me examples, these people said, I can't do this. I just can't. And then I had people in the United States and in the Netherlands. So here's a sample in the United States, and here's a sample from the Netherlands. I had them complete a questionnaire, and here on the vertical axis you see the average score on that questionnaire. And the lower the score, the more uncontrollable people thought love was, and the higher the score, the more controllable they thought it was. And as you can see, they scored slightly below the middle of this scale, which meant that they thought love is somewhat uncontrollable. So they didn't really think they could control it very well. But like I said, we know people can regulate their emotions, such as sadness, happiness, anger. So why would we be able to change how in love we are? Okay, and then some other studies have shown, that attachment and sexual desire, people think that those are more controllable than infatuation. People think that how in love they are, so love intensity, is more controllable than who they are in love with. People also think that other people are better at love regulation than they. So like, sure, other people can do it, but I can't. And people think that love up-regulation is easier than love down-regulation. Okay, so now I had a pretty good idea of what people think about love regulation, but then I wanted to test, can people do it? So in my first study, I tested if people can up and down-regulate their love feelings. And I tested 2 strategies that I found in the emotion regulation literature, so that we know are effective for changing emotions in general. And one is called positive reappraisal. So reappraisal basically means reinterpreting. So in this condition, I ask people focus on positive aspects of your beloved, the relationship, or positive future scenarios. So you can think about, my beloved is so smart, so handsome, so funny, or we get along so well, we hardly ever fight, or we'll get married and live happily ever after. Then I also have them do the opposite, so negative reappraisal. I ask them to think about negative aspects of their beloved, the relationship, or the future. So my beloved is lazy, they never do the dishes, or we fight all the time, or we can't agree on these crucial aspects, or we're gonna get married, but we're probably gonna get a divorce like so many people. And then this is what I had people do in the lab. So this was a computer task. And I showed them either the word view, which meant they were just going to just look at the picture just naturally, or I asked them to increase, so then they had to do that positive reappraisal while looking at the picture, or I asked them to decrease their love feelings, in which case they used this negative reappraisal while they looked at the picture. So then they looked at a picture of their beloved, and they thought whatever I asked them to think, and then I had them rate how infatuated do you feel right now? How attached, how positive or negative, and how calm or aroused. So does that task make sense? What I had people do in the lab?
I wouldn't know what you're asking me to do.
Right.
I don't understand it.
Yeah, so this was a computer task, so they looked at these things on the screen.
Yeah.
So this was one screen, and then they would see a fixation cross, and then they would see a picture, then a blank screen, and then one question, another one, another one, another one. So it would sort of flash in front of them. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, and so all my studies use a variation of this task, so it'll come back again. Okay, so then looking at the results, so there were actually 2 groups, a relationship group, so people that were in a relationship, and a breakup group, but the results were very similar between the two groups. And then, so I asked them, how infatuated do you feel right now, and how attached do you feel right now? And what the results showed was that positive reappraisal of the beloved, so when people were thinking about nice things about their beloved, they felt more attached than when they were just looking at the picture of their beloved without thinking anything. And that was both in the relationship group and also in the breakup group. And then negative reappraisal, so thinking not so nice things about your beloved, decreased how in love people, how infatuated and how attached people were compared to just looking at a picture. So looking at a picture without thinking anything in particular was always a control condition. That's sort of how people naturally feel, and then I had them think certain things to try and change that. Does that make sense? Okay. I also looked at people's brain waves to see how the brain responded to the pictures of these people, of their beloved. And this is what it looks like. I have a system like this in my lab. You put a cap on a participant's head and it has all these little holes in it, and you click electrodes in the holes, and then it measures brain activity that is already happening in your brain. This is a very cool system. It's very safe. It's not dangerous. It doesn't hurt. Again, you're not changing anything. You're just looking at what's happening in the brain already. And then we can see with a millisecond precision what is happening in the brain. So that's very cool. So this is what that looks like. Again, there was a relationship group and a breakup group, but the results were pretty similar. Here on the horizontal axis is time, and this is milliseconds. So from 0 to 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second, and the picture was on the screen for 1 second. So this is the brain's response to that 1 second picture. And then on the vertical axis is microvolts, which is an electrical unit, and so that indicates brain activation. Your brain creates electrical signals, and we can measure those on the scalp, which is what we're doing with this method. There's one quirky thing. These kind of graphs, for some reason, I don't know why, plot positive downwards. So the lower it is, the more positive. Don't ask me why. These black lines here are just neutral pictures of strangers doing mundane things like reading a newspaper or shopping in a grocery store, and the brain doesn't respond very strongly to those because they're actually a little bit boring. But then if you show people pictures of their partner, the brain shows a pretty strong response. So it's the red line here, because it's like, oh, that's my partner, that's my beloved. It's very emotional, a very emotional stimulus. And then I've shown that if people think positively about their partner, that made it even more positive. So this blue line here is even lower than the red line. So if I asked people to think positively about their partner, the brain responded even more strongly to the picture of the partner than when they were just looking. And sort of conversely, if I ask people to think negatively about their beloved, that is the green line, then that response became less positive. So it's less positive than the red line. So then the brain responded less strongly to the picture when they were thinking negative things about their beloved. Now, we know that this brainwave, this positive brainwave here, is called the late positive potential, and we know that it signifies attention. Attention to stimuli that we pay attention to stimuli that are very emotional. So you also see the same response to pictures of cute puppies or mutilated bodies or things like that. And so we know it means attention. And so these results showed that if you think positively about your beloved, you now pay more attention to your beloved. If you think negatively about your beloved, you now pay less attention to your beloved. So this is a really nice way to sort of objectively see how the brain changes when people think certain things. Does that make sense? Because I also ask people, how in love are you, which is the only way to figure out how in love someone is, but also people can then try to figure out what you are trying to study or what you expect. But this is more objective because people can't really modify these brainwaves. Okay, I think I'll just...
Can I ask you a
Yeah.
question? Can you go back to that last one? So why on the breakup group
Yeah.
are they so powerful on the downswing when there's not the love that there would be in a relationship group?
Yeah, so this effect of thinking negative things only occurred in the people that were in a relationship, not in the people that had experienced a breakup, and I don't know why. And actually, this is the group that could benefit most from thinking negatively about their beloved, right? Yeah, so I don't know why. It's a great question. Yeah. I'll skip this study, but what you could remember, what you need to know about this study, is that even just looking at pictures of your beloved increases love feelings. So this was a follow-up study that I did, looking at pleasant pictures, so of cute puppies and nice flowers and chocolate bars and French fries did not make people feel more in love, but looking at pictures of your beloved did increase infatuation, attachment, and also marital satisfaction. So that is a behavioral strategy, something that people can do to increase love feelings for a beloved. Okay, then this was another study that we did, and this was inspired by that sexual desire is usually very strong in the beginning, but then it decreases rather quickly over time, and that can cause issues, right? Especially if the sexual desire levels are different between partners, so one has a higher level than the other, that can cause problems. Or also just if it decreases over time, people may get worried, right? They may think, my sexual desire for this person is decreasing, something must be wrong, maybe I need to break up with them and move on to a different person. Even though I think it's very natural for it to decrease and not necessarily an indication that anything is wrong with the relationship. So we wanted to test how can people upregulate sexual desire for a long-term partner. So we invited people to the lab who were in a long-term relationship, and I had them do a very similar task. I had them read a regulation prompt. I'll give you some examples. Then I had them look at a picture of their partner, and then I asked how much sexual desire do you feel right now, how infatuated, how attached, and how satisfied are you with the relationship right now. And I had 4 different prompts. So the first was the same as in the previous study, so positive reappraisal of the partner. So I asked them, for example, think of a time your partner made you laugh. And I had I think 30 different prompts to help people think about nice things about their partner. Then we also had about 30 prompts about, this is called reappraisal of sexual decline. So it's normal for sexual desire to decline over time. And it's okay if sexual desire declines over time. It doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong with the relationship, so prompts like that. And then we also had sexual imagery, and these were prompts to help people think about having sex with their partner. So for example, think of something naughty that your partner could say during sex. So that sort of made them fantasize about having sex with their partner. And then I had a view condition. There were just 3 asterisks on the screen here, and people could think whatever they wanted. So that was the control condition. And here are the results. So it turned out that sexual imagery, which is this light gray bar here, increased sexual desire compared to just the view condition. So if people were thinking about having sex with their partner, they now had reported more sexual desire for their partner than if they were just looking at the pictures. And then positive reappraisal of the partner, so sexual imagery also increased infatuation, so both sexual desire and infatuation. And then thinking positively about the partner increased attachment compared to not thinking anything in particular, which was a replication of our first study, so that was nice to see that again in different people in a slightly different task. Does that make sense? So then I did a couple studies on heartbreak. So I just showed people can mostly increase love feelings, and in the first study also they can decrease. And then I really wanted to focus on people that were heartbroken. So I asked which strategies can be used to downregulate love feelings during heartbreak, and does that make you feel better, right? Because that was our goal. So again, a very similar task. I had different regulation prompts. People looked at a partner, and then they indicated how in love they were and how negative or positive they felt. These were the different strategies. So again, we negative reappraisal. So what is something mean your ex said, or what's that stupid t-shirt that they own, or stuff like that. we had them think about things that were unrelated to their partner, so distraction. What would you do if you won the lottery? What's your favorite food? So think about these nice things that have nothing to do with your ex. And then love reappraisal is, again, sort of educating people that it's okay to be in love with someone I'm no longer with. It'll go away over time, things like that. And then the view condition was just, again, the control condition. Does the task make sense? So here are the results. So here are the love ratings, how in love people were, and here are the valences, how good or bad they felt. Negative reappraisal decreased love feelings. So here's negative reappraisal, make people feel less in love than the control condition, which is what I had found in my very first study. But I was hoping it would make people feel better, right? If you are now less in love with your ex-partner, you probably feel less sad or upset about the breakup. But they also felt worse, which was, of course, not what I wanted to do, right? So that was a shame. But I think it's because, I'm asking you to think all these negative things, so that's going to make you feel bad, right? Or maybe people even thought, if my ex was so stupid, then who was I? I'm still in love with them, right? What does it say about me? So maybe just thinking these negative things decreases how in love you are, but then makes you feel worse. Makes them feel worse than not doing anything in particular. However, distraction did not change how in love people were, but it did make people feel better. So what I think people could do when they are heartbroken is they could think negative things about their ex first, to sort of get over the breakup, and then distract themselves to feel better, right? So maybe they need to do both of those. One, to become less in love with your ex-partner, and then one to make you feel better. But it would be nice to test that in a new study. Here are the brain waves again, and what I found was, so this black line here are just the pictures of the ex-partner with no instructions. People were just looking, so it's a very strong reaction. But then all of the other three strategies decreased that response. So the brain responded less strongly to the pictures of the ex-partner when people were trying to do these strategies. And again, this is an indication of how much attention they pay to the picture. So people now show less attention, now have less attention for their ex-partner, which can be really good when people are scrolling through Facebook and the pictures of the ex-partner just pop up, right? It's nice if you can more easily ignore them because they are not so attention-grabbing. Or maybe they see their ex-partner at the grocery store or at school. And so I think this could really help people not be so focused on their ex-partner anymore and move on. Okay, so then I did one more study. So this is the last study that I will talk about. Because I was still a little bit concerned that, yes, we can make people feel less in love with an ex-partner, but now they feel worse. Like, that was bothering me. So I was trying to see, is there something else we can do? Can we replicate that finding? And then is there something else we can do to make people feel better? So, again, very similar task. People read some regulation prompts, picture, and then told us how infatuated, how attached, how negative or positive, and how upset about the breakup do you feel. I again did that negative reappraisal of the ex-partner. What is something mean your ex said? But then we also had them do positive reappraisal of the situation. So what's easier now that you're single? Who can you meet up with now that you're single? What food can you eat that you're now single? What hobby can you take up now that you're single? So all these sort of the benefits of not being with this person anymore. And the control condition. So the results showed, again, as in the previous studies, that negative reappraisal of the ex-partner made people feel less infatuated and less attached, so less in love. So I've now shown that 3 times, so this is really true. And then positive reappraisal of the situation, which is this bar here, made people feel better than thinking all those negative things about their partner. So both distracting can make people feel better after a breakup, but also thinking about the advantages of no longer being with that person can help them feel better. Does that make sense? Questions so far?
Have you tied any of this stuff into grief?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and actually it has been brought up before, once by an anonymous reviewer of one of my grant proposals, and once by my friend who's a clinical psychologist who was helping people process cancer diagnoses. So So maybe this is what you're referring to. Both these people were suggesting, when people pass away, we tend to think very positively, right? They were so great and so smart and so nice. They were like the best person, which then makes us extra sad that they are now gone. So what if someone passes away, we could think about how they were not perfect, right? And all these annoying habits they had, and that made us, annoyed. Which is typically not what we do when someone passes away. But maybe that helps you then be a little less sad about this person no longer being there. And when it was first suggested to me, I was like, well, that sounds weird to me, right? You're going to go to a funeral, and now we're going to think about how this person was not great. But maybe you shouldn't do that at a funeral, but maybe, slowly over time, you can start thinking that, yes, they were not perfect, and they had their quirks and stuff. So is that what you were thinking about?
Somewhat, yeah. So it's kind of hard to explain in totality because the emotions are different. In some cases, of relieving of a sick person, the obligations that go with it, and you don't see her or him as it was when they were healthy.
Right.
And this can cause confusion in the remaining party as to which, is this good for me or is this bad for me? Or
Yeah. Well, and I think what you are talking about too is that you can be in love with someone and it can make you feel both good or bad, right? Because if you are in love with someone and they are suffering because they're very sick, it makes you feel terrible, right? If you're in love with someone and they love you back, that makes you feel great. If you're in love with someone and they don't love you back, it makes you feel terrible. If you are in love with someone, they were suffering terribly, now they passed away, you are probably relieved that they're no longer suffering, although you wish you could go back to when they weren't sick, right? So there's all these emotions that love elicits depending on the situation.
back to your original statement and definition of love, I think Paul had about 16 of them, aspects of what love is. And so one may be so romantic and the other may be so critical, obedient type of thing that, and that I think is kind of, how would you propose to interrelate those many definitions of love?
Yeah, so that's very difficult. So like I said, scientists do not agree on the number of types of love and what it exactly means. I think about love as a feeling. So I'm in love with someone that makes me feel a certain way, regardless even of whether they are, I'm in a relationship with them or maybe they don't even know me or something. I think a lot of other researchers have focused more on the social aspect. So how does it make you feel to be in a relationship with a person? Or what attitudes do you have about love? What is your opinion of how love is supposed to go, right? Who's supposed to ask someone out on the first date or something? So I think researchers just approach love as a social process or as an attitude, whereas I think about it more as a feeling, and I don't think any of those is more correct than the other. They're just very different ways of looking at the topic. So yeah, I don't have a good answer to how I would tie all the other definitions and forms of love to the ones that I'm studying, just because they may be very different.
You're honest.
Okay, so I have an overview slide with some conclusions because that was a lot of information, so here's your summary. People have preconceptions or beliefs that love regulation is undesirable and or at least difficult, if not impossible. But when I get people into the lab and I give them specific instructions on what they should think, they are able to change how in love they are, right? And this is not an on or off button, like I can't make people fall completely out of love with someone in the lab or completely in love, but it changes a little bit, right? So a little bit more or less in love. So how people can upregulate love feelings is by looking at pictures of the beloved. So that's the one study that I kind of skipped. But in that study I showed that if you just look at pictures of your beloved versus pictures of other people that you don't know, you are now more infatuated and more attached to your beloved. And other people have also, some other researchers are also studying this, and they have also proposed that this helps in long distance relationships, for example, right? If you cannot be with your beloved, and maybe you can't even video call with them, then maybe just looking at pictures of them can help you keep the feeling alive. And then I've also shown in several studies that positive reappraisal of the beloved, so thinking about all the nice things about them, increases how attached you are and also increases how much attention you pay to them. And if you are in a relationship with someone, then it's probably a good idea to pay attention to them. And then I've also shown that sexual imagery, so fantasizing about having sex with a partner, increases sexual desire for them and increases infatuation. And all of these strategies could help stabilize long-term relationships because we know, again, that those love feelings decline over time. That may lead people to decide to get a divorce or just separate. But these things are some relatively easy things that people can do to maybe prevent that from happening. On the other side, people can also downregulate love feelings. So negative reappraisal of the beloved, thinking all the ways in which your beloved is not so great, decreases infatuation, it decreases attachment, it also decreases how much attention you pay to them, which is great if you are trying to get over someone. But it makes people feel worse, which again is not what I had intended. But then if people distract themselves or if they think about the positive aspects of being single, that then makes them feel better. So people should probably use both of those. And then that can reduce heartbreak. And what I think is so great about these strategies, and I already mentioned it in the beginning, no one can force you to think something or to do something, right? As opposed to forcing you or giving you even medication without you knowing it. And so these are very safe strategies. People can decide for themselves if they want to up or down regulate. No one will tell you what to do. And then you can decide to do this whenever, wherever you want to. And the good thing is your beloved doesn't even need to know about this, right? So especially if you're in a long-term relationship and your love feelings are declining, it may be very difficult to tell the other person, hey, look, my feelings for you are declining. Can we do something about it? Like, that's not a nice conversation to have. Because, for example, you could do couples therapy, but the other person needs to be on board and willing to do that, right? Whereas these things, you can all do without the other person even knowing about it, and they don't have to be on board or anything. So I think that's really advantages of these strategies. I wanted to tell you a little bit about what I'm currently doing. One time, a journalist asked me, what are butterflies in the stomach? And I was like, well, that's a great question. I don't know. And then I looked in the literature, and nobody knows. Hasn't really been studied yet. But I did find some studies that looked at what the stomach does with strong emotions. And it turns out that if you experience a very strong emotion, be it positive or negative, your intestines are going to contract more strongly. And then we can say, for example, I have knots in my stomach. And I think the same thing happens with love, but then we call it butterflies instead of knots. And I tried to study this because I have those electrodes that we can put on people's heads, but you can also stick them on the stomach and measure stomach waves. And so I tried to do that, but I did 2 studies and the results were completely inconclusive. So I do not have proof yet that that is what butterflies in the stomach are, but I think that's what it is. And it could also be that I just didn't do it right because I know how to measure brain waves, I don't know how to measure stomach waves, so I want to pair up with a researcher that knows how to do that. To see if this hypothesis that I have is correct. One of my students currently is studying the similarities and differences between romantic love and addiction. A lot has been written about how love and addiction are so similar, or at least look similar. People that are in love seem addicted to their beloved. They think about their beloved all the time. They want to be with their beloved all the time, even to the detriment of, again, their work or their homework or their friendships or something like that. But we don't have a lot of studies that directly compare the two. And so that's one thing that we're currently doing. So I wanted to tell you that we are looking for research participants. Now you may not qualify because we decided to study vaping addiction just because it's becoming very popular. We were thinking what's a legal addiction that many people have so that we have a good chance of finding enough participants. But I was thinking maybe you have family members that vape and that may want to participate in the study. So that's why I gave you all those flyers. Has my contact information. You are also welcome to contact me with any questions or comments. But if you know someone who vapes, who is over 21, and who is in love with someone who does not vape, then they could participate in our study if they wanted to. So we will measure their brain waves while they look at pictures of their beloved and they look at pictures of vaping people, and then they can earn $50 and they can see their own brain waves if they are interested in that. So feel free to let me know if you think, or let someone else know that you think may be interested. Ask them to contact me and we can see if they can participate. Any questions about that study?
It's very interesting.
Okay, so here are my students and collaborators that made all this work possible, and I had some money from some funders. And then thank you very much for your attention. I have a lab website that you are welcome to check out. The lab is on Facebook, so if you want, you could subscribe to that. And you're always welcome to send me an email with any comments or questions. So thank you so much for having me.
Anyone have questions?
Yeah, I do. Any chance to get a copy of these notes?
Oh, these slides?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to send a PDF to you, and
Yeah,
then you can.
yeah, yeah.
I think the discussion between affection and love is very complex. And I like to.
I have these little flyers if you want them for her, so.
Yeah, you can also email me and I can send it to you, but I can also
Okay,
send a
good.
PDF to you. Yeah.
Okay, so-
How do you account for the variable of age in your participants? Looks like that would make a difference, what age group you're in.
So that's a great question. I'm sure it matters. I have not studied it. We know emotion regulation changes throughout the lifespan. Older adults are usually better at regulating their emotions than younger adults. And older adults experience more positive affect and less negative affect than younger adults. But that's why for the love regulation studies, I usually just only included young adults because I didn't want to have the confounding factor of age mixed into that. But it would be very interesting to test older adults to see how well they can regulate their love feelings, for example. I'd also be very interested in testing adolescents, right? Because I've now always tested people that are over 18 just because of ethical aspects. But adolescents, love is a very big factor in their life, and so it would be very interesting and important to test them too, but that's just more complicated. Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
There's another factor of morality.
What makes you think that?
Pardon me?
Why do you think that? What do you think?
Well, because some more rules would kind of negate some of the feelings that people would have.
Could you give an example? I'm trying to understand what you're suggesting.
Yeah, example, a married couple, the man goes blind and finds somebody else, which leads to divorce. And how would that interface become a thing? Not a thing, but a point of defining affection and the love and the rest of it.
Yep.
It'd be a very major impact.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this also relates to age. It may not be age specifically, but it may just be how society changes over time.
Yeah.
And just unwritten rules in society, even gender differences. I did one study on gender differences, but there's also gender differences in love for sure. But yeah, so people differ, right? Yeah, and so far I've mostly tried to study people in general. But it would be very interesting to also see how people differ depending on their morals, their age, their gender, things like that. Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference between the way men love and women love?
So I think it's mostly the same. I don't think the difference is huge, but I think there's definitely differences. And this can all be related back to, this is some evolutionary psychology. Women have one egg a month to reproduce with, basically. And if a woman gets pregnant, that's 9 months plus a year or so of breastfeeding, right? So it's a major investment for a woman to have a child, right? For a man, they have 1 million sperm cells per day. They could impregnate many different women in a day even, right, if they want to. So it's not a very big investment, right? So for a man, it's like, I'm thinking of a Dutch saying that I can't translate. It's like, let's just give it a go and see what happens. For a woman, it's like, well, I gotta be really careful, and I need to be really sure that this is the right person that I'm gonna have a child with, because it's gonna take me at least 2 years before I can have another shot, right? And so that's a long story, but that means that women are a lot more picky than men. just because they have to be. And why is it
Yeah,
flashing?
could you turn this off?
That's
I
annoying.
want to shut it.
Just close your laptop.
I just
I don't know what's going on with it.
Probably the projector.
Can I close it?
yeah, I don't need
Here it comes.
Oh, yeah. And so anecdotally, when I would talk to potential participants on the phone and to see if they would qualify for a study, I would ask, so are you in love? And then the women, these were usually college students, the women would say, yay, right? And then the men would say, yeah, she's nice. Right? So I think, I think maybe it's a matter of intensity or a matter of commitments. So those are things that differ between men and women just because of biology, basically.
Have you done any research with people with dementia?
So not related to love. I was studying for my PhD. I studied emotional memory in younger and older adults, but they were healthy older adults, so they did not have dementia. What would you study? Do you have a specific research question in mind?
Well, just, you don't know what's going on in their minds. I just wondered if you had any insight about that.
Yeah, so I don't. I'm sorry, and I would have to look in the literature to see if someone else studied that. Could be, but I'm not aware of it. No. Other questions?
You work under the psychology department?
Yes.
And also?
Yeah, psychological sciences. Yep.
So you teach courses then in
Yes.
psychology?
Yes. Yeah. I teach, for example, of course, emotions and the brain, but I also teach the statistics course, things like that.
This is off the subject that you've been speaking about, but you mentioned vaping among the young people. Why do you think that's going on so much?
So I will admit I know nothing about vaping, and so the student that came into my lab, she also doesn't vape and knows nothing about vaping. So when we wanted to study addiction, and we were thinking, what addiction could we study? And we definitely don't want to start studying cocaine because that's illegal, and how are you going to get these people into the lab? So we wanted something legal and sort of easy to study. So she's been going to vape shops just to ask them, so how does this work, right? And so we don't know much about it personally. What I think is happening, smoking is becoming more and more difficult, right? It's being banned inside, it's being banned, for example, on the entire Amstel campus. It's also becoming more and more expensive, and we know it's, of course, very bad for your lungs. And if you vape, which is an electronic cigarette, you get the nicotine, but not the tobacco. So in that sense, it's a little less unhealthy to vape than to smoke cigarettes. I think it's also less harmful for the people around you because there's less tobacco. So that's my guess, and it's also just something becomes how do you say that? When a lot of people start doing something, it just becomes fashion. I don't know the right word, but yeah,
Acceptable.
yeah, people start copying each other, right? And then I think a lot of tobacco companies are sort of starting to realize that society thinks they should not be selling cigarettes anymore. So they are now changing to sell vape equipment under the idea that that's less unhealthy, which it is, but it's still unhealthy. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
So interesting.